Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to another Super Unreal Power tutorial. Today we're going to look at how to make your character throw a fireball. This video is probably going to be a bit longer since we'll go through a lot of what goes into making a character function like you'd expect in your average game. But hopefully it'll help you understand how different blueprints and other systems all work together. Alright, so let's check out how it looks. Walk around a bit. Then hold the F key to fire. And the sound works just fine. Works at a distance as well. Without further ado, let's put it together. Today we'll be using Unreal Engine version 4.19.2, which is the most current version. So let's crack that open. And then let's hit New Project. Make sure that third person is checked. We also want to make sure that we have the starter content. And let's just call this Fireball Project. And then go ahead and hit Create. Right, and then we're going to create a new folder. And we're going to call that Fireball Character. And then we're going to get the base character from third person BP down here. We're going to open up Blueprints. And we're going to drag the third person character into our Fireball folder. And let's just copy it there. Then let's rename this guy to BP Firechar. Let's open him up. And we're going to create a couple variables real quick. The first one is going to be isThrowing. And we'll use a question mark. And the reason we're creating these variables now is because we're going to have those in the character blueprint itself, and we're also going to have some complementary variables in the animation graph once we get there as well. So let's create our second variable, which is going to be isDead. And then we'll compile, and we will save. Now we'll go back to the main window, and we're going to change some of our project settings. So open up Edit, Project Settings. And the first one that we're going to change is in Maps and Modes. Let's open selected game mode. Let's change the default pawn class to our BP Fireball Char. Then let's go to Input down here. And we need to create the action mapping for our ability that we're going to use. So go ahead under Action Mapping, hit the plus. And we're going to call it Fire. And then for the button, let's just use the F key. I'm using WASD to move, and F is really easy to reach from there, so let's just go with that. And then we'll close that. It'll save all of our changes automatically, so we don't need to worry. Alright, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our mesh and animations that we need to make our character throw a fireball. So I'm going to open up a site called Mixamo. Okay, here we are. First things first, you're going to have to create a profile if you're going to download any meshes or animations, but don't worry about it, it's absolutely free. What Mixamo is it's really just a free site where you can download character meshes and animations. You can use some of its sister sites to create characters as well. We're not going to do that, we're just going to use some pre-built ones. So to start, let's go up to Characters up here in the top ribbon, and we're going to select the character that we want to use. Alright, now there's quite a bit of characters that you can choose from here. I'm going to go with the Exo Red just because it looked to me like the type of character that would be throwing a fireball, so that's the one I'm going to go with. So once you've selected your character, on the right, go ahead and click Download, and then make sure that this is in T-Pose and FBX, and then go ahead and download this guy. I'm not going to download it because I already have him, but you'll still need to do that. So then I'm going to hit cancel, and then next we're going to go over to the animations tab, and we're going to get the animations that we need for this project. So in the search bar, go ahead and type in Magic. Here we've got the standing idle. Let's check that one out first. And then that looks just like what we want to use, so we'll hit download. From this menu, we don't need to get it with the skin. We also don't need to change the frame rate reduction or the format. Just make sure that the format's in FBX. And then go ahead and download that guy. Next we're going to look at Standing 1H Magic Attack 1, and that's going to be the main attack that we're going to use to throw this fireball. So download this guy as well. Should have the same settings as the last one. And then we're also going to need some locomotion moves here too. Let's see here. We are going to need standing sprint. But over on the right here, let's check in place, because in Unreal all the animations are done in place. So let's download this character. And I think the rest of the animations that we need are on the next page, so we'll slide over there. Right here we have standing walk forwards. We're going to check in place, and then we'll download that one as well. We're also going to need standing run forward, that is to say. Check in place, and download this one. And the last one that we need is standing react death. Standing react death falling backwards. We may end up using this later. That looks good, so go ahead and download that one as well. And once you have all those animations, we'll bring them into our project. So I'm going to minimize this. Next thing that we need to do is we need to create the folders that we're going to use. So we'll right click, and this one is going to be EXO, which is just the name of the character that I downloaded. You can name it based off of whatever character you downloaded if you like. And then we're going to create a second folder, and we're going to call this EXO Animations. Next, we're going to open up our File Explorer. We're going to go to Downloads, and we'll slide down. Now, all of the files from Mixamo are going to have these little upside down raindrops or hot air balloons or whatever they look like to you. The first one that we need is our EXO Red FBX file, and we're going to slide that into our EXO folder. And it's going to ask a few questions, but we don't need to change anything special. So we'll just hit import all, and in just a moment it will load those. Okay, looks like our EXO downloaded. One thing to take note of is that you may get this little message log here. Just so you know, you don't need to worry about that. Nothing that it's telling us is going to affect us for the sake of this project. So let's go back. And let's open up our File Explorer again. And we're back in Downloads, and we're going to grab our animations. So we need to be in our animations folder here real quick. First, we are going to need Magic Attack 1. We're going to need Standing Idle, Standing Run and Walk Forward, Standing Death Backwards, and Standing Sprint Forward. It should be 6 animations total, so we're going to drag all of those into this folder, and that should be just a moment while it imports those. And this is going to ask for a skeleton, and this is why it's important that we download the FBX character file first, because we need to get our skeleton. Now we'll select our new EXO Red skeleton for these animations, and then we will import all. And that should just take about a minute or two. Alright, now that we have those, we're going to go back to the main character folder, and we're going to create a blend space and start working on these animations. So we'll right click inside the folder. We're going to highlight animations, and we're going to select Blend Space 1D. And we're going to select EXO Red. And let's call this Firechar. Now in the horizontal axis, we're going to rename that to Speed. And let's set the max value to 300. And now we're going to drag our animations in. Let's start with the standing idle, and at 0 speed we're going to drag in the idle. So if we're not telling it to move, it's just going to stay in this idle animation. Next we're going to have walk, which we're going to put at this first line here. And that should snap in automatically. And then we'll put in run at that middle. Let's put the run right here. And then we'll put sprint last. And now that we have all those in, let's save, and then we'll close that out. We don't need it anymore. And now we're going to start our animation blueprint. So we'll right click again, highlight animation, and select animation blueprint. Also selecting the EXO Red skeleton, and we're going to call this ABP, you guessed it, Firechar. So we'll open this up. And now you might think that we want to slide in our blend space and plug it in right here. But if we do that, we won't be able to blend between our running and our other animations like throwing. So instead we're going to close this out and we are going to create a new state machine. And this state machine we're going to call locomotion. And then we are going to drag these together. Let's open up locomotion and let's drag off of entry. And we're going to create a new state that we're going to call idle walk run. Let's open that up, and this is going to be where we're going to put our blend space. So I'll drag it in, connect, and then we are off of the speed going to drag off and we're going to promote to variable that we're just going to call speed. Next we'll go back and we're going to create the animations for our throwing a fireball and death as well. So let's drag off of idle walk run and we're going to add a new state. And this one we're going to call throwing. And inside throwing, we're going to put in our magic attack 1. We'll connect to the result. And you want to make sure that loop animation is unchecked because we really just want the character to do this one time. So we'll go back. And then off of throwing, we're also going to want to drag off back to idle walk run. And now take a second to notice these little circles here. Each one of these is a transition rule, and what we have the transition rules for is before we switch from idle walk run into throwing, we're going to check a certain variable, and the same goes for when we go from throwing back to idle walk run. So we'll open up these and we're going to promote this to a variable that we're going to call isThrowing. And if you remember at the beginning, we put a question mark inside the standard character blueprint, but in the animation blueprint we are not going to do that, just so we can tell the difference between the two. Next we'll go back and we'll open up the other transition rule, and with this we're going to drag in isThrowing, but instead of connecting it directly into the result, we're going to put in a not boolean, and we'll drag that in. And now we have both the transition rules for throwing. Next, we're going to do the same thing for our death animation. So let's drag off of idle walk run. Whoops, a little too far. Add a new state. We're going to call this state death. And then we'll open up death, and we're going to put our standing react death backwards animation into it. And once again, we want to uncheck loop animation because we do not want this character to go through the death animation over and over and over again when he dies. We just want it to happen once. And then we'll drag back to create our second transition rule. Now let's open up. We'll promote this one to a variable as well that we're going to call isDead. And then we'll go back and do the same thing that we did before for returning. We'll drag in isDead. And then we're going to put in another not boolean and plug that in. And that's everything for our animations, but next we need to do a few things in our event graph. So let's compile, and then we'll go on over to our event graph, and then we're going to do a few things here. So let's drag off of the executable pin, and we're going to get an isValid node. Off of input object, we're going to get a try get pawn owner. Now off of try get pawn owner, we're going to get the movement component. Off of the movement component, we are going to get velocity. And from get velocity, we are going to get the vector length. There we go. And here we're going to connect to our speed. So let's drag in our speed, and we're going to set that, as long as it's valid, to our vector length. Now next we're going to drag off of try get pawn owner, and we're going to cast to our character, the BP Fireball character. And now we are going to connect to the animation variables that we have in the character blueprint. So we'll drag off, and we're going to find isThrowing, and we are going to set that to our isThrowing variable in here. Connect the pins, and we'll do the same thing for isDead. Let's go back. Alright, next we're going to compile and save, and we are done with our animation blueprint. Okay, the next step in our project is to create the particles that we are using for our projectile. So first let's right click, and we're going to create a new folder to hold all these. Let's just call it powers. And then let's go into our starter content, and we are going to borrow from the particles. Here we have the particle fire. We're going to right click and we're going to duplicate that. And let's just change that from fire to fireball. And then let's duplicate that, and let's call this fireball charge, because our goal here is to have two different particles. One of them is going to be for the actual particle, and the next one is going to be basically when the character's charging the fireball. This ability is for more of a superhero than a wizard. So like with a wizard, they just summon the fireball out of thin air, but with a superhero, they kind of generate the fireball before they throw it. So that's kind of the effect that we're going for. Today we'll be looking at how to do that. So let's start with our primary fireball, and we're going to make a few changes here. We don't need the embers, so we're going to delete that. We also don't need distortion or sparks, so we're going to delete those as well. Delete the first constant acceleration in the primary flame. We also don't need the dynamic, and we are not going to need initial velocity in any of these either. And just for this one, we also are going to eliminate size by life, because this one isn't going to change, but our charging fireball will. Now that we're done here, we're going to go into the spawn. Let's open up rate and distribution. And the constant we're going to change to 20, just to get a little bit more flame there. Next we're going to go into sphere, open up the start radius and the distribution here. And let's just change that to 5, just so we can shrink it and get a little bit smaller of a fireball. Then we'll go into initial size, open up start size and distribution again. And we're actually going to change this a little bit. Let's make this 50. We'll change this one to 80. This one we'll change to 35, and we'll change this to 60. Just because we want a little bit smaller of a fireball here. Next we're going to go into our second flame, and we're going to change the spawn constant here to 20. And we're going to change the sphere size here to 6, because we just want the flames to go a little bit farther beyond the core fireball. And then let's change our initial size here. We're going to set this to 40 and 30. And then also let's go into our lifetime, and we're going to set the lifetime as well here. We'll change this to 0.4 and 0.8, so the flames kind of move a little bit quicker. Now we'll go into our smoke, and the lifetime for the smoke, we're going to make this a little bit longer just because it'll be kind of cool with a little bit of a smoke trail. So we'll do 3.5 in the minimum and 4 in the max. And let's change the initial size. Actually, the initial size is pretty good. Let's keep that. Alright, and then we'll save, and we're done with our first fireball. And then let's grab our second fireball and make a few changes here. Now once again, we don't need embers, so we're going to delete this. We don't need sparks, and we don't need distortion. We're also going to delete the first constant acceleration. We'll delete both of the dynamics. And last, the initial velocities. We are going to keep size by life this time because this one is going to start small and then grow. So in the animation, it takes about 0.8 seconds from the start to get to where we are going to release the fireball. In between that time is where we're going to have our charging fireball. So for about 0.8 seconds, we want this thing to grow to its full size, in which case the character will then throw it. One other thing I gotta look into first that I missed. Let's go into the required for these guys. For the first flame, we want to make sure that use local space is checked because we want the fireball to stay consistent where it's at. But the other two, we'd like to trail. So let's make sure that use local space in flames flame 2, and smoke are not in using local space. So let's save that. Let's go back to our charging fireball. And we're going to do something similar to those. So let's check use local space here. And let's uncheck use local space with the smoke. But next we also have a few other things that we want to change. Since the lifetime of this is going to be that 0.8 seconds from when we start the animation to when we release the fireball, we're going to change this emitter duration to that 0.8 seconds. And then we also want to set the emitter loop to 1 because we want this to go through this lifetime one time. And then we'll do the same thing with the other ones. Let's change the emitter duration here to 0.8. Emitter loops to 1. And then the same with the smoke. 0.8 and 1. And now this is going to do the same thing. Alright, so let's go into the spawn for the first flame. Let's change this to 20. Because again, we want a little bit denser of a fireball. Actually, let's do 15 just to maintain that smaller feel to it. Now that sphere, let's change this back to 5. And the initial size, we're going to make this quite a bit smaller. So let's do 30, 40, 20, and 30. And now we'll go into our size by life. So let's open up the life multiplier and the distribution. And then the constant curve. And we also need to open up points. Open up 0. And then we're also going to open up 0.1. Now for the out value, let's set these to 0, and that way we'll start at nothing. And then we want to set the other ones to 1 in every value. Oops, that one's 10. There we go. We'll go into the next one. And we'll go into the spawn for this guy. Let's set this to 15. Change the lifetime to 0.4 and then 0.8. Let's set the sphere size to 6. And then let's change our minimum size to 30, 40, 20, let's do 20. And 30, like the other one. And then let's change our size by life here. So at 0.0, again, we're going to have 0 and 0. And then 1 and 1 and 1. So we've done everything for the first two flames. Now for the smoke, let's go to the spawn. Leave the constant at 2. Let's change the initial size to, let's just make the smoke a little bit smaller since we are dealing with a smaller fireball. To, actually let's do 35 and 25. And that will work. So we'll save. Okay, so let's close both of the particles. We'll go back. And now we'll select both of them and we're going to drag those into our powers folder. And let's just move them over there. We don't need multiple copies of this. And then we'll go back into our powers folder, and now we are going to create the blueprint that contains this fireball. Okay, so next we're going to right click inside the folder. We're going to create a new blueprint class. We're going to use the actor, and we're going to call this BP_fireball. And then we'll open this up. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a few components here, starting with a sphere collision. We don't need to change the name, but we do need to drag this over and set this to be the default scene root. Next, we're going to add a particle system. In this particle system, we are going to set the template here to be our particle fireball. Looks good so far. And the last component that we need to add is a projectile movement. Alright, and now we'll be editing all these. So back in sphere, we're going to change our collision presets. Now right now it's set to overlap all dynamic. We're going to change that to custom. And we're going to set world static, world dynamic, physics body, vehicle, and destructible all to block. And then we're going to change pawn over to ignore. Now we'll go into projectile movement, and we're going to change the velocity here to 2000. Let's change homing acceleration to 2000 as well. Okay, now because we don't want our projectile to drop, we're going to set the gravity scale to 0. We're going to set the initial speed to 2000 and the max speed to 2000 as well. Let's check rotation follows velocity. And then let's go back into the sphere real quick, and we need to uncheck enable gravity here, because we don't want this to be affected by gravity. And we'll compile and we'll save. Now before we go into the event graph, we're going to, with sphere selected, we're going to scroll down and hit on component hit. And everything that we're going to do is going to work off of that. So now we'll compile. From on component hit, we're going to drag off and spawn emitter at location. Now what we're going to do here is when this fireball hits, we want there to be an explosion and a sound from where it hits. In order to do that, first let's select the emitter template. We're just going to use the particle explosion. We didn't do anything custom because the particle explosion that it comes with works just fine actually. So we'll drag off of hit next, and we're going to break the hit result. And from the impact point, we're going to plug that into location. And then we're going to drag off of hit actor. We're going to get actor transform, excuse me. We're going to split the struct pin, and then we're going to plug in the return for rotation into the rotation here. Next, we're going to drag off the executable pin here, and we're going to play sound at location. And for the sound asset, once again, the starter content actually has a great explosion cue that we are just going to use. And for the location here, we also want the impact point to be where the sound of this appears. And then finally, we're going to end with destroying the actor, because we don't want this fireball to persist after the explosion. And now we are finished, and we're going to compile and save, and we'll close the fireball. And let's go back to our character folder. And the last thing that we're going to do is create the script for how this fireball is going to function. So let's go into our character. And the first thing that we need to do is change our mesh to be the new character and the new animation graph. So we'll select XORed. And then under animation, the anim class is changed to none, so we're going to switch that to ABP Firechar. And as you can see, the character has adopted the new animation graph. And then let's compile and save. Let's go to the event graph. And let's find some open space down here. And let's right click, and we're going to add the fire key that we created at the beginning of this lesson. Type in fire. And it should say input action fire. If it does, then you're on the right track. Now off of pressed, we are going to add a branch. And then the condition of this branch is going to be is throwing. So before we do anything, we want to make sure that if we're already throwing, we don't want to do this move. So next, we're going to right click down here, and we're going to get a character movement component. Now from this character movement, we want to make sure that we stop all motion so that we're not doing the move while we're still walking around. So we'll drag off of the character movement, and we are going to disable movement command. Drag that up. And then we're also going to drag off a stop movement immediately, and we'll plug both of those in. And then we're going to attach those to the false, because we want to make sure that is throwing is not true before we actually do this. We don't want to go through this animation if we're already throwing. And next, we want to grab our throwing variable. We're going to set that to true. And this is where it's going to start doing the animation. And the reason why we're waiting till we're stopping is because we really don't want to even start doing the animation until we are no longer moving. And off of the executable, we're going to drag off and put in a spawn emitter attached. And this is going to be where we activate our charging fireball. So fireball charge. And now we've got a little bit of work to do, because we want this fireball to spawn from the character's hand. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our skeleton and add a socket. So we'll select the mesh. Then we will double click on the skeletal mesh here. Select the skeleton up at the top. And then go ahead and select the right hand. Just click anywhere on the right hand. and then right click over on the left skeleton bone list, and we are going to add socket. And this socket, let's just leave the name as right hand socket, but go ahead and copy that name because we want to make sure that we have the spelling correct, because back in our character blueprint we have to type in what that is, but if we have it copied we can just paste it in there, and that will ensure that we don't have any spelling errors, because if we have a spelling error then this will just fail. Now first, before we go back, let's move the socket a little bit out just to make sure that it looks good. And then also we can put in a preview asset to see what it looks like. If we right click the right hand socket here, add a preview asset, and then we'll do the particle fireball charge, and that'll show us what it looks like. It only did it once, but I mean, you could kind of tell there it looks just fine. So then we will save. We'll close out of the skeleton. Let's save this as well and close that out. Let's compile and we'll save here. Let's go back to our event graph. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag the mesh in. Off of the mesh, we're going to connect that to attach to component. And then we are going to get socket location. And we're going to connect that into the location. And under socket name, we are going to paste in our socket name. And we're also going to paste it in under attach point name as well. And then for the location, we're going to set this to keep world position. We're done with our fireball charge. Next, we're going to drag off of the executable, and we want to make sure that we wait that 0.8 seconds before we do our next objective here. So we'll hit delay, and let's change the duration to 0.8. Alright, now we'll drag off of the completed pin, and we are going to spawn actor from class, and this actor is going to be our fireball. So we'll go find BP fireball, connect that. Let's set the collision to always spawn, ignore collisions. And now for the spawn transform, as a default, where it will spawn this is just on the core of the character basically, but we want this to spawn from where the hand is going to be at the release of this transition. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click here, we're going to get actor transform, and then we are going to break the transform. And then we need to add a vector to the location here, so we're going to put in a plus and then vector vector. From working with these variables already, I've kind of found that if we add 25 to the Y and 35 to the Z, it seems to put this fireball right where we want it. So we'll go ahead and use those variables, and then we're going to drag off and add a make transform. And we don't need to change the rotation or the scale, so we'll just plug those directly in. And then off of the return value, we're going to plug that into our spawn transform for the fireball. The next thing that we need to do is, now that we've spawned our fireball, we need to destroy the charged fireball. So we'll drag off of the return value here. And then we are going to destroy component. And then we'll plug the executables in. After we destroy component, we need another delay. And the second delay is going to be the rest of the animation, which is about 1.3 seconds. You can go in and look at the numbers, but this is about where it's at. Now after the delay, we're going to drag in is throwing, leave that set to false, and now we'll finish off the move by resetting the character movement so we can walk around again. And we'll do that by getting our set character movement that we used at the beginning, and we'll paste that up here. And we'll drag off and do set movement mode. And then we're going to set the new movement mode to walking. And we'll plug in the executables. And now we're ready to test our creation. Let's compile and save. Right, and we'll walk around. And then we'll fire. Now this sounds kind of quiet on your end, but on mine it's pretty loud. And there is variation depending on how far away your fireball is. And then I'm also going to move, hit the F key, and I'm still hitting move, and it is stopping motion just like it should. So we know that everything's working correctly. Thanks for watching, guys. If you got something out of this video, like and subscribe. If you have any other power ideas that you think would be cool to see in a video, leave it in the comments below and I'll figure out how to do it or point you in the direction of someone that does. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Super Unreal Powers.